I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 241 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. So I am thrilled to introduce Deanna Bass today as my next podcast guest. Deanna is really special to me. Deanna was one of my very first mentors in my corporate life, so at Procter & Gamble. And our relationship actually dates back to my very first weeks as a new hire in the company right out of college. So it was 1995. We met in the Atlanta sales office. And she was really the very first person to introduce me to the idea of a women's network. So I guess in many ways, I have her to thank for the inception of Brilliant Balance. I met Deanna along with a cohort of really exceptional women that I was so lucky to cross paths with at that time. They ranged from other women who were hired in the same year as me to women who were hired, in the year or two or three before me. So kind of this collection of young women just starting out in their careers. And Deanna, as well as two other really special women to me, Renee and Lisa, and they were all in human resources in the Atlanta sales office. And Deanna was one of those people who, when you met her, you knew there was like gravitas to every word that she uttered. She had this exceptional way of communicating that I later learned was honed through many years on the debate team in high school. But she had this extraordinary way of communicating, and yet she was so fun, so quick to laugh, just this raucous laugh. And I just loved being sort of in the orbit of that collection of women, especially those three women in HR who were kind of kindly shepherding us through the early days of our careers. And Deanna was someone who I kind of serendipitously followed around, or she followed me we don't really know how this happened, but we kept crossing paths over and over again throughout our career. I was with the company for 15 years. You'll hear in the interview, Deanna was there for 35. And, our paths kind of kept orbiting around each other. So there were lots of different moments in time when she plays a significant role in my career. One of them was when I made the move from sales to marketing, and Deanna just did some really bold, kind of unprecedented things in supporting that move for me. It was not something that people were doing without having to sort of go back to the bottom of the ladder. And I was able to do it without going back to the bottom of the ladder, thanks to some really great sponsorship and support and advocacy that she and others did on my behalf. And then that kind of opened the door for other people to do the same thing. She was really pivotal in encouraging me and supporting me to take long maternity leaves. I took advantage of the full 1-year maternity leave policy that was existing, but not a lot of people were doing, and a number of different less than full-time schedules over my years there. So Deanna went on to really climb the ranks within human resources at P&G. And her work there is kind of legendary. Her influence extends far beyond the company. So I'm going to do her formal bio because she deserves it. I want you to hear her credentials, but you are going to find Deanna to be warm and witty and wise, and I can't wait for you to meet her today. So Deanna Bass is the former executive director of global diversity and inclusion at P&G. She was responsible for defining and implementing best practices for attracting and developing and retaining diverse talent, for building inclusive leaders and cultures, and for ensuring consistency in the practices and measurement systems that were used across the globe. She was a chief architect of P&G's gender equality strategy and co-author of P&G's Women at Work, Myth versus Reality campaign, which you'll hear a little bit about today. Deanna has expertise in organization design, organization transition and transformation, strategic HR partnerships, change management, and divestitures. And through her global diversity and inclusion work, she was responsible for executing strategic initiatives for talent management, company culture, employee resource groups, equality-based policy, and leadership development. And beyond that, she is a really strong mentor and advocate and ally for equality inside and outside of P&G. Something really interesting about Deanna, and you'll hear this in the interview as well, is she very strongly believes that men play a critical role in advancing women and in achieving gender equality. And so she was the key driver in a partnership with Catalyst to bring the MARC program to P&G. If you don't know MARC, it's Men Advocating Real Change. And it helps develop emerging male leaders and senior male leaders on critical inclusive leadership strategies that include things like unconscious bias and privilege. And in less than 2 years, those workshops got to 800 P&G managers across more than 15 countries. Deanna was recognized by Working Mother Media with the 2018 Ted Child's Life Work Excellence Award for her work advancing company culture, dependent care, flexible work, D&I, and parental leave policies. Beyond that, she is a mother of 3. She lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she is a dear, dear friend. So I am so excited to introduce you to Deanna Bass. So Deanna, my friend, thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be so fun. Will you start out by telling us just about your day today? What's on the agenda?
Well, it's a Monday morning, and I got into a lot of body work over the last few years. I had an ankle injury, and one of the body works that I have really stuck with is called Alexander Technique. And so every Monday morning, I am laying on a table with my dear healer, body worker, and friend, Meg McCann, just getting my body back oriented to the way it's supposed to be naturally. That's
sounds
how I love Monday mornings because of that.
Sounds like a great way to start a Monday.
Yes.
Awesome. And then you're with us, and then where are you off to?
So the other thing I'm doing is another friend of mine told me about, she gets henna tattoos on her eyebrows.
Wow.
I'm going to go get a henna tattoo on my eyebrow this afternoon just to try it out. You got to try some of these things and see if you like them or not.
Yes. The spirit of adventure is so authentic to who you are and who I know you to be. So I love that you're doing that. Fantastic.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, let's get
These are all the things I can do now that I have retired.
Henna tattoos
this is in my year of retirement. I'm just the year that I took off. I can do things like in the middle of the day, get a henna tattoo on my eyebrow.
It's so good. So you're in this interstitial, sort of this lovely waiting place between a long career at Procter & Gamble and whatever lies ahead, whatever that may be. And so I'm grateful to you because I know you were pretty committed to not doing a lot of things like this during this year. And I'm grateful that you're making an exception for me and for our audience.
Yes.
Awesome.
I am happy to be here. I would at a drop of a hat do anything for you.
So sweet. So sweet. Well, I've shared a little bit in the intro about our shared history, but let's get everyone grounded in your history with sort of women at work, right? In your early work career, you ended up at Procter & Gamble. How did you end up there?
It was very serendipitous. You and I were talking earlier about astrology, and I'm in this phase of an astrological chart that says anybody you run into is important right now. Pay attention. And I think maybe, when I started with P&G, I was in that phase as well. I was working in Chicago and not very happy. And I met this woman who was moving from Dallas to Chicago. My family was in Dallas. I had made the decision to go back to Dallas. And this woman, I still have a picture of her. I can't remember her name, but I have her picture, gave me the business card of a recruiting agency in Dallas. So I moved to Dallas. I called the recruiting agency, and 3 weeks later, I was moving to Cincinnati with Procter & Gamble.
Wow.
Very, very it was just serendipity.
Wow.
It all lined up.
It's so funny. That is actually a story I hear more often than you might think about that company. Like that, my experience was kind of similar, and just how did I end up there, and then stay for so long? How long were you there?
I crossed 35 years at Procter & Gamble.
Amazing.
So my whole working career.
And for people listening, that is not an uncommon story at P&G, right? It really is a company that has a lot of people with lifetime employment, long history, and there's good incentives for doing that. So in today's world, like hearing that in 2022 is jarring. But back when you were joining the company, or even when I was, it was not unexpected to think that you would spend your entire career there.
The entire system was built for long-term employment. It's, as I left P&G, that of course, the world culture has changed, the global culture has changed, and that had to start changing as well. I think that some of the college graduates coming in had a very different sense of like personal agency than maybe I did when I joined, and I felt comfortable and confident in working long-term for a company like P&G. It was, I had seen it from my parents and, things like that. So, so I think maybe I might be one of the last few, folks that are going through that long, but.
And when you joined the company, so to speak, when you went to work there, what was the environment like for women? Because you have gone on to do so much work on behalf of women, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. I'm just curious what your early recollection was of the environment for women when you were new to the company.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that since you and I had the original conversation. I would say I generally had a very good career with Procter & Gamble. I had very good managers and leaders. And so there was, when I came into Procter & Gamble, we were at the beginning, middle of the beginning. A lot of work as a company focused on, I'll just say, diversity at the time. So there was a realization that we needed more women in the workplace, more women in positions of leadership. We needed more Black and brown people in positions, in the company and in positions of leadership. And so there was a real commitment when I joined the company to doing some of the early hard work around diversity. It was really formative for me. I feel like I grew up with sort of really strong views about humanity and about empathy. But when I got into P&G, I realized how much I didn't know. And it's been an amazing journey. So that commitment to building a culture that, early on, I think it was about diversity. I don't really think we had taken in what equality meant, what inclusion meant. But it was about breaking down some of the just core biases that we had sitting in the workplace.
And you arrived, just give me the year, late 80s?
Late 80s.
Late 80s. And I got there in 95. And I would say what I remember was it was wheels up on all of those networks, and it felt so normal. So normalized to be, invited to a women's network meeting or go, connect with those women. And there were plenty of women around. I certainly did not feel by 95 like I was in a really extreme minority of any kind. I never really doubted the opportunities that were available. And yet, as we're going to talk about, there are some things sort of that were maybe swirling in the culture, not just at that company, but in corporate culture broadly, that maybe were in the way that I was a little naive to.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I'm going to say one more thing on this point. I have a really good friend who still works at Procter & Gamble. In fact, she's leading our, whole North America business. And Monica is a Black woman, and she and I both kind of went through some of this training together early on. I don't think she has really held for me that in those early years, I got a lot of learning as a white woman at the expense of her as a Black woman. And I think part of if you think about what your experience was coming in, it was really a white woman's network.
Yes.
Right. So I've thought a lot about that. I still today think a lot about, I say it was formative for me. But I also have to take in that formative learning that I had was at the expense of some people that I really care about. And it took me years to be able to see that.
And I love that
was the journey that we were all on, I think.
Yes. Yes. And you have clearly furthered that work, which is so much of what I want to dig into and talk about today, because I think not only does it affect, our shared experience in that particular company's culture, but more broadly, I think it's representative of sort of the work that's happening in corporate life, right? For people out there listening who are working in corporations of all sizes and shapes in the United States or outside the US. But I think we have a fairly US-centric audience on this show. Yes. And so I think we can talk to that experience. So there was a point along your career path. You were working in HR when I met you, right? But had started elsewhere. So talk a little bit about your trajectory into human resources and then the work that you evolved to later.
So my early career at P&G was I started in this organization that was a blend of advertising and sales. And I moved from that position. I had to choose at some point. I moved into sales. Largely because I wanted to live in Atlanta and get married. And so it was a choice I made to move into sales. I had a long period of time that I needed to stay in Atlanta. And at that point in time, in order to be able to stay in one position, I had to be nimble in terms of what I was willing to do. And that's really that nimbleness and that need to stay in one location in sales for a period of time led me into human resources. It was really by just raw luck on my part. I loved that. I loved my career in human resources that I took some assignments. I went back and forth between sales and human resources for many years. And then probably mid-career had to make the formal decision to build my long-term competency in human resources. That's how I got there, needing to stay in a location.
Yes. And it's another serendipity, right? In your career path, really. It's funny to me because I don't know that all organizations do this, but in my P&G experience, there were these sort of functional leaders aligned with other functions. So we had HR leaders aligned with sales. And that's where I crossed paths with you, was as a new hire in the sales organization, having HR leaders that were aligned with that sales organization. So It's kind of an interesting hybrid crossover, right? Early on, and then you moved more central, but interesting. So this work was in your work plan and in your DNA, really early on, the diversity work, which led later to equality and inclusion work. And so I want you to tell us about how eventually you got into the work around myths of women in the workplace. And I want to dig into some of this kind of elbow deep.
Yes. So you met me early in my career with human resources. And those were, again, I'm going to use the word formative because there are things that happened that shaped my lens when I got into a more senior roles at Procter & Gamble. When I met you, Cheryl Ann, I was, I think it was on my third child. I was, on and off of reduced work schedules. And at that time, frankly, reduced work schedule meant I worked full time, got paid part time, but I got a work from home day, right? I got to work from home 1 or 2 days, whether I was on a 4-day or a 3-day schedule. And, I wish I could say that's hyperbole, but it isn't. It actually was true. And part of that was the system of the company. And part of that was, internal to me, but I was trying to keep my career on track, whatever on track meant at that time. I was trying to raise my children. I had 3 small babies and I was trying to stay in Atlanta. And, people like you came along and, and I was killing myself. And I do remember thinking, this can't be how it is for Cheryl Ann. It can't be how it is for those of you that are, for Lisa Bradford or, all of our friends back then, right? That it can't be this way. Something has to change. So that was one of my first real experiences as a woman in the workforce, thinking I have to do this now because, right? But what I'm doing is wrong. I know what I'm doing is not the right way to do it. I just am not in a position to change it.
It's like a link in the chain, right? I think what I'm hearing you say is you have this awareness of it's as good as it gets right now, but it's not good enough. There's got to be some,
Right. So I did a lot of work with women's networks. I had a lot of, experiences of taking, maternity leaves and reduced work schedules and trying to find, schedule flexibility. I moved into some HR roles that had me leading the diversity work in large business units and, still continuing. I had a real focus on the development of women really throughout my career. I had a couple of pivotal realizations for myself. One of them was I had been leading diversity work in big business units and I was asked to lead it. I moved into our beauty care business. I was asked to lead it in beauty care. And I just said, no. I'm like, no, I'm done. Somebody else has to do this for a while. I'm done. I'm not going to do it right now. And it was shocking to some people that I just said, no, no, I'm not going to do. I actually have a really big job over here that I'm going to do. And I understand that the diversity work is important, but it doesn't always come with the recognition that is required to keep people like me in this game. And then I had an experience where one of our chief HR officers called a group of women from North America into a big conference room and said, we're really struggling with retention of women. We need some help from you to understand why are we losing all of these women. And I can remember sitting there and I just felt it boiling up inside me. I said, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. Where are the boys? Where are my male counterparts? And why aren't they sitting at this table being part of this problem with us? It is unfair that you've only pulled the women in the room. And, and I just felt like I had to say it. And I had to say, no, I'm not going to do this. Yeah. Not until Tim and NJ and Mike, and not until they're sitting in the room with us. This is how we break this down going forward. And it was a really pivotal moment for me because I think for me, I felt like there were too many women carrying the full burden. Now that is a little bit of hyperbole, but it is what I felt at that time. Right? The number of men actually working on some of the problems around diversity were not enough. And it certainly wasn't commensurate with the number of men in the organization. So pivotal moments that kind of galvanized some things for me that when I moved into in 2015, the global diversity and inclusion role for the company, I had some really clear things in my mind that I felt needed to be addressed. Now they took different forms, but those were some of these building blocks from in my own experience.
Don't blow past this moment though. So in 2015, you get named to this global diversity and inclusion role, which is where it stops being a side hustle. Right. Like that. And I think that's
my
so
day job.
Yes.
Right.
Because I've said this on so many stages, like the women and the minorities who are running these employee resource groups, and it is unpaid side jobs. Like, right. They're doing it at night. They're doing it on the weekends. They're doing it because they know there's a need and because on some level they love it, but it is not their job. It's not the work that they're hired. And that role, it was your job.
Yes.
Yes. What a beautiful moment to get to be like, but what if I could make how many times did we say, what if I could make my whole job this women's network, which by the way, I went off and did, I just left the company to do it. But like on some level that notion of this is what I really feel called to do. Right. And can I make the biggest impact actually in that vein? And then you did, which is, that's why you're here. I love it. Love it.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So at that point, now you're in a role where this is your whole job. This is what you're paid to do. Mm-hmm. And then tell us about that work.
So you and I have talked a lot about the work that we call the myth work at P&G. So the myth work started, there were some of us that were moving into these roles at the same time. So I had taken on the diversity and inclusion role. A woman named Carolyn Tasted had come in to run the North America business and then lead our kind of as one of the executives, the corporate women's leadership team for the company. And, as I was coming in, you go into a new job and you start like just listening and looking and trying to get the landscape. And I was doing this on a global level. And there were a couple things that were happening. Like this was at the time when It was around the time that Sheryl Sandberg wrote Lean In. It was around the time that the Confidence Code came out as a book there, right? And both of those books coupled with, podcast, but I hold those two as the lead conversations on women in confidence. Yes. So I'm coming into this role, and there's all of these people inside and outside the company that are talking about women's confidence. We've got to get at women's confidence. You got, women in confidence. And I'm watching these powerhouse women around me, whether they were, in our manufacturing sites, whether they were in our administrative and technical communities, whether they were in management communities. I'm not walking around P&G going, look at these really lacking confidence women. It just doesn't ring true to me. And even some of those women were holding this mantle of, we've got to get at women's confidence. And I'm like, I think it's the wrong message. I think they're actually wrong. They've codified behavior as lacking confidence rather than codifying behavior as something that's more aspirational for women. So reflections like that started this notion of myths. Women lack confidence is a myth, period.
Amen.
There was another kind of narrative, these stories that we tell ourselves that was, predominant at that time, which was as we were trying to build the pipeline of women to executive levels, right? I'm like, what do you mean we're trying to build the pipeline of women to executive levels? I've been here for 25 years. What happened?
They're there. Yeah.
Right. What do you mean we don't have a pipeline of women? And it was shocking to me that we were still talking about it that way. So again, I was behind the curtain for a while in this role. And I'm like, wait, that's not exactly the right narrative, right? Because it's actually there. We just keep talking about it like we haven't gotten there yet.
Right.
And this is a company that actually was there, but we were still holding a narrative that we weren't quite there yet. And then the last one that, I started off talking to you about, is this whole notion of women at home and women at work.
Yes.
Right. And this realization that the only way we get equality at work for women is that you start working on equality at home for women. And, as a consumer products company whose predominant consumer is female, how do you help break down that barrier around the globe about what is women's work at home? What is men's work at home? And how does that bring women to equality at work? So those are the myths that we were started to really work with.
Yes. And we're going to take them one by one because I could talk about this all day with you. So we're going to get into all three of these. But as you get into confidence, that's where we're going to start. You all will love the story that when I had booked a speaking engagement at P&G on the subject of confidence, and you called me and said, we have to go to lunch before you're going to get on any stations. We need to chat about this. And thank goodness, I think we were already reasonably aligned in sort of what the message track was going to be. But I thought that was so thoughtful. Not that you would have ever said to me, don't say this or do say that, but like, hey, I want to get some context into your mind as you're shaping these remarks, and then go fly, do your thing. And that talk became more about courage than confidence as a result of that conversation. So the talk, and I still give this talk, and I love giving it, and it's still mind opening to audiences whenever I do, is like, confidence is not something that you can read externally. Confidence is a feeling. Right. And if we're walking around telling women that they're not confident, then guess what they're going to start believing? That they're not confident, because they don't know how to calibrate that feeling. It's an internal feeling. What's externally observable is courageous acts. We know courage when we see it, but courage only exists when you have the fear and you do it anyhow. Right. So there's got to be a little bit of I'm not feeling very confident. I'm going to do this thing anyhow. That's what we're rewarding. That's what we're looking for, So the whole talk sort of took on this direction that I still love to this day and still am delivering because of that conversation. So
that's awesome.
Yes. And it is so important because confidence it's an internal feeling. I don't know when you say I don't feel confident or I do, how do I know what that feels like for you? I don't know.
Well, and I said earlier, Sherilyn, part of what happened was that I called this early on, we ended up calling it the leadership myth. Like, what is leadership? And the myth of the male mythology of leadership is actually, not working anymore.
Right.
But then when you start to codify women's behavior as lacking confidence, like where can you go? And part of what happened was, I love this example. The Hewlett Packard did this study. We talked about this before. They were looking at how men and women, I'll get this sort of
apply for jobs. Yeah.
Apply for jobs, right? I'm going to be in the ballpark, but not exactly accurate here. And what they found was that women would apply for a job when they had, 80% of the criteria. Men would apply when they were at about 60%, something like that. And one of the big outtakes of that study was that women lacked the confidence to apply for jobs unless they were absolutely sure that they, could get the job. And men were so much more confident because they would just apply anyway. And so what got codified in that is that women lacked confidence. What did not get codified, what did not even get talked about, was the overestimation of potential that the men showed up with, right? And that is as damaging to a pipeline of talent, that overestimation of potential that, by the way, we all believe in because we like that story, than it is for the women who didn't choose to apply for a job because they actually were following, hey, you said you needed this and I don't have it. I've never had that experience. Right?
So you're absolutely right that never have I ever heard anyone talk about it from the other side, right? From sort of comparing the opposite direction. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. The two other things that I've unpacked with clients in that same study, and I would love your thought on this. One is, I think the women didn't want to waste their time. There's an efficiency element of like, why would I apply for something that I'm unlikely to get if I don't meet your stated qualifications? I don't have time for that. Like, I think there's that. And the second piece is not necessarily understanding the rules. So the rules of job postings, in my experience, is it's a wish list. Wouldn't it be great if we could find this magical unicorn who has every one of these characteristics? But we don't actually expect to. So we're going to get as close as we can with some collection. I think sometimes maybe we don't know the rules of how the game is actually played. And because of that, we think, it's written as a list of must-haves, not a wish list of qualifications. So those are two other lenses on that same study that were not the publicized conclusions.
There was some work that was done. We did quite a bit of it in P&G from linguists who would look at job postings and look at it from a diverse lens and say, what are we saying here? And what does it cue to men that it doesn't cue to women? Or what does it cue to a white population that it does not cue to a Black or brown population? And so I haven't really looked at the job postings nor am I qualified to, but I think there's all of these unwritten things that happen in a system that has been built from one lens, which is what a lot of us have grown up in.
Amen.
Right?
Yep, for sure. So this piece you codified as the leadership myth, which is and I just want you to state it in your own words.
Yes, we called it a leadership myth. And the myth is that the style of leadership, which has been predominantly authoritarian, top down, non-empathetic, that is the myth is that is the predominant leadership style for today. And it's not actually true. That the things that women are bringing to the table, the focus on strong, healthy teams, the focus on humility, a willingness. One of the things that the confidence code talked about was they would talk to women about the imposter syndrome, right? And somehow that sense of I'm having to learn as I go. I'm not sure I belong here, but I'm learning as I go was coded as lacking confidence, right? Not humility, not an enormously positive characteristic for leadership in, you know, right?
Deanna,
in
that is so
world.
good. The reframe of imposter syndrome to humility.
Yes.
Full stop, because I know this audience really drank the Kool-Aid on the notion of imposter syndrome and just the word syndrome, the use of the word syndrome.
Right.
Right. It's already like, so calling that humility, which is a positive trait that says I am aware of where I am not yet experienced and willing to learn, it's a beautiful reframe.
And be courageous enough to move on in.
Go do it.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, it goes right with your courage comment,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, I mean, and I called it the fix the women myth because so much of it was like, if we can just get women to be more confident,
Yes.
if we can just get women to, you know, the part of my frustration with the affinity team structure or the employee resource groups that are unique to one group is that you put all of the onus on those groups to fix themselves, right? If we can just teach women to be more confident, if we can just teach our, you know, African ancestry employees to be more this, if we can just teach our Asian employees to be more this, like that is not a prescription for success anymore.
No.
At all. It was helpful 30 years ago when you didn't have mass. Yeah. It's not helpful today.
So mass is a perfect transition to the second myth, which is around pipeline. So let's get into that one.
So the pipeline myth started with this, you know, this conversation of we're still working to build the pipeline of women in this, you know, global company. And what we had done really well is actually build a strong pipeline of women. We had other problems that we hadn't really solved, right? So we were, in my humble opinion at the time, solving the wrong problem.
So we're hiring lots of women, like off of college campuses. They're coming in droves, right? More than 50%, probably. At least 50.
In the end, 50%. Probably at the time that I started, it wasn't quite at 50%, but we just, you know, if you were bringing in, let's call it, you know, 40% women, and then you were only seeing 20 years later, 10% women or 12% women in the executive pipeline. And oh, by the way, the volume of women hadn't changed. So the volume of women was still at about 40% total managers. This is total managers.
Yep.
Right. It just meant that they weren't being pulled through the pipeline at the same speed that the men were being pulled through.
So tenure, in other words, they're staying with the company, but they're not in this executive pipeline. I think that's an important distinction. This is not an attrition story. This is like
not an attrition story.
Okay. And I think that's, again, as you translate this, listening to your own organizations, like there are attrition stories. Like we don't know how to keep women. And then there's, we don't have them, we're not deeming them in position for these senior roles.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Now, I will say there was an attrition problem with Black women. There was an attrition problem with Hispanic women, right? Yep. So we knew where the attrition problems were, but holistically on a global company, attrition was not the issue. Yep. So you have to start asking, what are the issues, right? And I had so many hypotheses that were wrong. Right? Like we kept generating, like, what is this? What is this? What is it? Is it the maternity leave cycle? Is it, you know, a whole host of things? And we did this fairly substantial study of our own organization, right? And we found, like, you know what we found, Cheryl Ann, is that it's a lot of things, but not one thing.
Yes.
Right? It really helped me understand the systemic nature of retention, development, and advancement of women, right? That there's not one silver bullet. Mm-mm. And the other reflection on the pipeline is if you have in your total population 40% women and only 20% are making it through, right? And again, these are I'm doing simple math. This is not representative of P&G right now. What you have to think about is that in that model, you just advanced 20% of men who are not as capable as the women that you left behind. So that is a deterioration of your executive pipeline as well.
Yes.
Right. So when men make up 60%, but they're getting 80% of the promotions, 20% of them are less qualified just by math than the women that you left behind.
Yes.
Right.
So I think it's so important that you're saying, and it is our bias. So often we want to point to the one thing. It's not one thing. There's a lot of little problems to be solved that collectively sort of create this mythology that the women just aren't there. We just don't have options of who we can put in these roles. And so the question becomes, why? And, why are we characterizing it that way? Sort of reshaping that narrative, going back and looking at all of those different feeding factors. So again, when you're listening, this work has to happen across companies of all sizes, right? Deanna sat in a very large organization, very well resourced, doing this work at a very broad scale. But this same work plays out. What we don't always have are people tasked with asking the questions, doing the digging, making the changes. So I think it's so important to kind of hold up these beacons of, at the highest level, maybe a gold standard, what does this look like? Then the question becomes, how do you translate this for you listening back into your own organization? And maybe it's as simple as asking the questions. It's as simple as getting your hands on the data.
It is as simple as getting your hand. And this is a data exercise. It is just like, was one of my biggest learnings is we said we wanted to get to 50% representation of women at every level across every function. That is a math exercise. That is, you can go to every organization and say, this is your portion of that goal. And you must, and we need plans on how you're going to get there. To include early on, it was the names who in the next 5 years is in your pipeline of female talent to be promoted, and what is the plan? And then I started saying, actually, who are the men and women in your pipeline? So
it's the whole pipeline,
right? Yeah. What's your whole pipeline? And if your pipeline starts to shift, we need to know that, right? So that we know if you can't meet your goals, then we've got to get it from someplace else. Right? It was a simple math exercise, like breaking that down for people to say, oh, we're only talking about this number of people.
It's not that many. Right.
It's not that many. We're talking about the top 6% of the company, right? That's not that many people.
In a giant company. In a giant company. So again, translate this back to, they were talking about ones and twos in some cases for smaller organizations. Yeah.
Right. And to your point, so it was a math exercise. It was an intentional, who is in the pipeline? What are the plans? When is it going to happen? And we followed it, right? We followed it for a long time. But this, we had to break our own mindset that there just aren't enough women. There aren't enough women in the workplace. There aren't enough women in our pipeline. There aren't, right? None of that is actually true.
Right.
For any company. None of that is true. What is true is that you might not have the culture, the systems, or the intention to keep, retain, develop, and promote women.
Yes.
Right? This is very seldom is this a number of women issue. It is always something more internal in a company.
Or outside, which is sort of like the link to your the third and final myth we're going to get a chance to talk about today is how much is the balance of power, balance of responsibilities at home playing into sort of even the interest and intent of women to be in contention for these roles. So let's get into that one because I know it's resonant with the Brilliant Balance community.
Yes. So I'm going to go back to Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book, which I said earlier. She opened the conversation about confidence. And one of the things that she said, and Sheryl Ann, I remember listening to her, I was watching her like on Good Morning America or something. And she said this, which was women have to be more choiceful about who they bring in as partners. Right? If your husband or your partner is not willing to be equal at home, perhaps you should think about not marrying that person, right?
Right.
Not having that person.
I remember hearing her say it. Yep.
Right. I remember I had such a visceral reaction to that for some reason, which is ironic for me. Right. But I was like, that just what about true love? And what about, what about the Cinderella story? She's actually 100% right. It is a choice that women must make about who they bring in as their partner. And is their partner going to be an equal partner at home? Full stop. Not a helper, not tell me what you need me to do and I'll do it. An equal partner at home. And that it is so important because we will never fully have equality for women in the workplace until we have equality for women at home. And that is, it's more than the partner that you have. Although I'm going to say it is critical that women think about who they're bringing in as their partners and that you hold your partners accountable for their half of the equation, not they're helping you out, right? It's a huge mind shift. It's a huge mind shift. And it gets at some of the heart of how a lot of us have been raised as women and our remit at home, right? But yes. Equality at work, which means equal pay, policies that support men and women to be parents of, new children, policies that support men and women for flexible schedules so that you can have a balanced, holistic life, right? So it is both policy, it would be nice if we had a government system, leadership in the United States that provided at a minimum affordable childcare and childcare leave for men and women, but also in your companies, right? If a country doesn't do it, a company can do it. And it's a choice on the part of a company, but it requires the voice of employees, right? Voting with your voice and voting with your decision to work for a company to get these things that allow for full equality at home.
I'm said amen about 10 times during this interview already, but I think that so much of the rules that we assign, like the narrative is my favorite word for it. The narrative we have around work at home is like, but it's my responsibility. And I'm grateful for help. I'm grateful for assistance. Same thing then with it's my responsibility to go have this badass career. And I'm grateful for the flexible benefits. I'm grateful for the extended maternity leave. I mean, that was my narrative for sure when I was taking 1-year maternity leaves and doing 80% schedules and 60% schedules. And I did all of them. And I was grateful. Like that was my narrative was, I'm so lucky and blessed that they're letting me, right, do these things. And much like you, it's not that hard to say yes to that if you've hired someone who is going to do whatever it takes to still deliver the results, which often means working beyond those agreed, boundaries.
Right.
So the simple fact when you said like we have to make these policies available to everyone so that we really can sort of cycle in and out of taking advantage of them. My husband did not take advantage of those things, nor were they available to him. But because of that, I was the one who was slowing down the trajectory of my career because I'm so grateful I can take advantage of these, but at the same time, I'm taking myself out of visibility and taking myself out of timelines. So I think that's just so paramount that if we don't have, again, I come at this often with our audience from the what can you do at home? And that's my role. But I love that you're coming at this from, but what can the organizations do to better enable that, the equivalency and the sharing at home? Because if we have stigma for men or for anyone to not be able to take paid leave, to not be able to do less than full-time schedules, to not have flexible, then we're just continuously sort of reburdening the traditional women who are taking the advantage of the policies that exist. Yeah. It's such an important flip.
It is. And, there's, Shirley, there's so much research out there, especially coming out of Europe, that when men take paid leave, in the countries where access to paid leave for childcare, for, time off, for all centered around children, when they take that, women return to work more often. There's a direct correlation to pay equality and men's paid paternity leave. Men are healthier in those countries. Children are healthier. There's so much good that comes when we create a world where men have as much right as women to be new parents. Right? It's good for women, it's good for men, and it's really good for children.
Yes.
But we've created this world where men don't even have access right? In too many cases, nor do we have a culture that makes it acceptable for them to want to be new dads, right? To want to be the person, if it is a family that wants somebody to stay at home full time, that it be the man to do that. I mean, that is coming along. And I promise you, the people that are being hired now
will change it.
They will change it. And Absolutely. It is it's a cost of entry for many men today. Mm-hmm. Do you have paid paternity leave?
Mm-hmm. And you see it. I mean, I think you kind of feel it in the water and you see it in the data that there is a stronger sensibility around shared responsibility, work, times, taking turns around career moves that's just happening with this generation that's coming up now, behind mine, but coming up now, which it's wonderful to see. And like I said to you earlier, you took your place in the chain, right? By you taking, for example, less than full time, it enabled people like me. I will never forget Andrea taking a 1-year paid maternity leave. And there is no question in my mind I would not have done
and having a job to come back to she knew about that was a promotion upon her entry back in. I mean, those things are so important.
That's right. Because the fear of taking the leave, if you don't know what you're coming back to, is like, that's the paralyzing, piece. So I think the taking our place in the chain and knowing that like with every turn of the dial, it can get better and better is exactly how it should work, right? We should want to see it continue to get better and better and not, I think I get anxious sometimes when I hear like the bitterness of like, well, I didn't have it that way, so why should they get it? I didn't get that, they don't need that. I didn't have it. That's just crap. I hope we're past that.
We are and we aren't all at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. But look, it is a wave that's coming no matter what. So it's a little bit of get on board. And frankly, you have a question later on that you had on this sheet that you sent me that said, what would you say to senior leaders? Can I just say it right now?
Yes.
Right. If you're a senior leader in an organization, like really take on the remit to fix some of these things, right? Expand your remit. Right. Too often we get, well, this is my job. Expand it, especially if you're in leadership positions. And some of these things, like it doesn't matter whether you had to do it one way or the other. Get them fixed now. And for example, if you're working in a company and there is not paid paternity leave and you are in a position of leadership, start working it. Right? Start working that, because the advantage to the women in your organization will be enormous. Right. And by the way, to the men too. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, you get both sides, men and women. They get everybody involved in something that's meaningful to them, but then in a system that starts to share the load on both sides of a person's life.
Yes. The advice to senior women is you are in positional power to enact policy, like influence policy. Use it, use that power. Mid-level women, I wonder, my advice to them, and I'm curious what yours would be take advantage of the opportunities that are there for you. That was my experience was, again, if I did not watch mid-level women right above me, like you and Andrea doing it, I wouldn't have. It was the permission slip I needed to kind of walk in your footsteps. And then I turned around and had women follow me because I did it. They can't, they've come and told me like, I did it because you did it. And because you showed me it was possible. What would you say to those mid-level women?
I agree with everything that you just said. I think that being courageous is really important at mid-level. I think, one of the things that you've been such a champion of, your company is even named this way, this brilliant balance. Like pick wisely where you choose to spend your time. Pick very wisely and have it be expansive and meaningful. And if it's not expansive and meaningful, stop doing it, right? Just stop. So I would say that I would come back to this, really, really break down your own barriers, beliefs, and biases about what a woman's role at home is. Like really meditate on that, really spend silent time on it, and really think about where are you picking up more than your fair share, and start working with your partner, with your spouse, with your, to balance that out. It is critical for women's success at work. and frankly, for your success at home. I mean, those are the same thing. And the other thing I was thinking about as I was talking about this, know who you're working for. Like, don't take when you take a job, take it because you're passionate about it, but also know who you are going to go spend time with. And know that I was listening to Abby Wambach's, did you listen to this?
Address, yes.
Her commencement address?
Yes.
I loved, go listen to her commencement address and do that, right? Do that.
Flip some tables.
Who you are talking to. Know the numbers. Know the pay structure. Know that this is a company that is committed to paying you equally, breaking down the systemic barriers that erode women's economic empowerment, your economic empowerment. Know the numbers of women that are flowing through the system. Even if it's not your aspiration, you should work for a company that is committed to having 50% of the leadership of that company being female. And it should be diverse females and diverse males, right? But know that stuff. If you're mid-career, know that, and then commit to be part of the ongoing system of evolution, revolution, and change in this area. And then choose your words wisely.
Deanna Bass, you are a treasure, a delight.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this with me, with us, for just hanging out with me on the air today. It was awesome. Always. I loved getting to spend this time with you. I had, for those of you listening, I'd lost touch with Deanna for just a little bit. It's never far off, but it's been really fun to be reconnected with you of late and to see what's coming next from you in the world. And I'm just happy to be a small part of it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the work that you continue to do.
Well, that was fun. Sure you can tell, I had such a great time connecting with Deanna in this way. And I hope that you're taking something away from today's interview that inspires you, that sort of reignites in you the belief and the confidence that you can do something significant when it comes to women and to all realms of diversity, really, within your organization, no matter what level you are currently sitting in that organization. Deanna started teaching me that when, again, I was a brand new hire to the company, and reminding all of us that we had a voice, we had a presence, and that sort of our point of view mattered. And that's what I hope that you are taking away from this interview today. Till next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.